Hello, I'm Kim Merrifield, and welcome to the very first episode of On the Table, the show that takes a closer look at what's on your table. And by that, I mean food, one of the few things that has the power to unite us all. Food is an experience, social, personal, cultural, traditional, maybe even spiritual to some. Food engages all of our senses and feeds not only our bodies, but our minds and our souls. On today's episode, we'll be starting with a staple that has been a centerpiece of our dinner tables for centuries and continues to be a source of nourishment and connection to so many around the world. What is this staple? None other than good old-fashioned bread and butter. This is my bread and butter. Literally, that is. I made these both by hand last night. And believe it or not, it's a lot easier than you'd think. Stay tuned for the end of the episode to hear how you can do this at home. But first, let's start with an appetizer. Bread is universal. It represents both simplicity and sustenance, and it has a long and diverse history, taking many forms across the globe. From pita to pumpernickel, from focaccia to a French baguette, naan, challah, milk bread, flour tortillas, and more. A cultural catalog of carbohydrates, a tradition which dates back centuries, connecting us to our common humanity. 4,000 years before the dawn of agriculture, humans began grinding wildly picked grains into flour, producing the first ever flatbreads, which were baked on hot stones. About 10,000 years ago, we began cultivating these grains as simple staples that allowed civilization to flourish. This began in the Middle East, but quickly caught on in nearby regions and then expanded its reach across the known world. The earliest breads were unleavened, which meant they did not contain yeast. That was discovered by the Egyptians several thousand years later, who were the first to use fermentation in the bread-making process. As time stretched on, this rising trend became a global phenomenon, taking the world by storm and baking itself into the fabric of human history. Butter dates back just about as far. For as long as humans have had farms, we've been domesticating animals for milk. Butter, like fermentation, was discovered by accident when an ancient traveler brought milk along for their journey and found, upon arriving, that it had separated in transit, and that the results turned out to be both delicious and nutritionally dense. Cheese has a similar backstory, but that's a topic for another episode. That being said, these happy accidents have had a profound impact on how we set our tables and how we nourish ourselves. To think, thousands of years have passed, and yet some things remain the same. Sure, our techniques and our technology might be more sophisticated, informed by science and generations of trial and error. But the end result is more or less the very same product our ancestors were eating. Isn't that amazing? When I eat this, I feel I'm a part of that tradition. With that brief history out of the way, let's take a look at how bread is made and the surprising simplicity behind butter. Bread, in its simplest form, is typically made of just 4 basic ingredients: flour, water, salt, and finally yeast, with the exception of some flatbreads which may not require it. That said, the most essential ingredient to any form of bread is the flour, which serves as the base of the dough. Flour is typically made from grains, usually refined, which are ground into a fine consistency. Wheat, rye, barley, corn, rice, there are countless flours to choose from. But the most common one used in baking is all-purpose, which is derived from wheat. You likely already have this in your cabinet, which makes it a good choice for a first-time home baker. If you prefer a heartier texture, or something closer to what people of the past might have eaten, I'd suggest going for an unbleached whole-grain bread flour, or whichever variety has undergone the least amount of processing. This will result in more of a rustic style. But of course, there are plenty of options in between that will please nearly everyone's palate and preferences. So, now that we have our flour, our next component is the yeast. Yeast is a naturally occurring microbe that feeds on sugar and produces alcohol. This is the process we refer to as fermentation. The yeast are sold dry and dormant, but spring to life when water is added into the mix. When this slurry is added to flour, the yeast begin feasting on the sugars and fermentation begins, leaving behind air bubbles and enhancing the flavor of the dough. Speaking of enhancing flavor, our final ingredient is salt, which is used to help bring out the taste of the final product. When combined together, allowed to rest, shaped into a form, and baked inside a hot oven, these 4 simple ingredients transform into the familiar staple that everyone knows and loves. Our bread is now freshly baked and ready to be sliced, but what now? We can eat it as is, of course, but many of us would agree that it needs something more to accompany it. Some jam, some cheese, or how about some butter? That sounds good. But what is butter actually, and how is it made? Well, butter is a dairy product which is derived from heavy cream, aka the fatty part of milk. When heavy cream is churned or shaken for long enough, these fats begin to separate from the liquid until they begin to form together. The liquid that rises to the top is what we know as buttermilk. And this gets strained off and reserved, leaving behind only the solid butter. At this point, it can be salted, seasoned, pressed into a mold, or in our case, used immediately to melt into our freshly baked bread. Interesting, right? Who knew science could taste so good? Anyway, you're probably asking, how does this go from theory to table? How does it all come together? Well, for our third and final course, your dessert for this evening, if you will, I thought I would share an easy recipe that just about anybody can make at home. A recipe for an artisan-style boule, just like this one. It only takes a few hours, with no special equipment or prior experience required. And the result? With its crisp golden crust and its soft, dense interior, is sure to warm both your stomach and your soul. This recipe will yield 1 full loaf, or about 8 to 12 slices, so it's perfect for sharing with family, friends, or the bread lover in your life, whoever that may be. Without further ado, here's that recipe. What you'll need: parchment paper, a spatula, a large mixing bowl, and a Dutch oven or heavy-lidded oven-safe pot. Now for the ingredients, start with 3 cups of either all-purpose flour or bread flour. Bread flour will give a denser texture. If you prefer a softer bread, go with all-purpose. Next, you'll need half a teaspoon of instant yeast and 2 teaspoons of salt. Combine these 3 ingredients in a large mixing bowl. Then add 1½ cups of warm water. Give this a stir until it begins to form a dough. This dough will look a little wrinkled, but don't worry, it's supposed to. Once combined, cover the bowl with either plastic wrap or a clean towel and set aside for 2 to 3 hours at room temperature. Do not place in the fridge. In order for the yeast to do its thing, the dough must be kept relatively warm. After the 2 to 3 hours have passed, check on your dough. It should be about twice the size it was at the beginning. If it hasn't expanded that much yet, let it sit another 15 to 20 minutes more. Once your dough has doubled in size, it has now completed its first proof and is ready to be shaped. But first, take a few pinches of flour and flour your cutting board to ensure nothing sticks. I'd recommend flouring your hands as well. Next, place the dough out onto the cutting board. Then take one end and stretch it toward the center. Then repeat on the other 3 sides. This helps create structure for the inside of your bread. Next, flip it over and roll slightly until those edges are all sealed. It doesn't have to be perfect, just loosely shaped into a ball. Next, you'll set this aside on some parchment paper and begin preheating your oven to 450 degrees. Place your Dutch oven or heavy-lidded pot into the oven as it preheats. After your oven has come to temperature, Carefully remove the pot and place the dough inside. For easy cleanup, I recommend placing it in with the parchment, but be sure to tuck in the ends when you put the lid on. Once the dough is inside the pot, apply a light dusting of flour to the top and score with a knife. I scored mine in an X shape. Bake this with the lid on for a half an hour at 450, then remove the cover and cook for about 10 to 15 minutes more, or until the crust reaches your desired color and texture. From here, lay it on a cooling rack for about 15 minutes. Then, you're ready to slice and dig in. Wait a minute. I think we're forgetting something. The second half of our wholesome equation, the homemade butter. In order to make that, you'll need just a single ingredient, heavy cream, and something to shake it in. I used a blender bottle, but any jar or lidded container will work. The instructions are about as easy as they get. Pour some heavy cream into your container, seal the lid, and give it a good shake. The cream will progress through several different stages of consistency, starting with a smooth and foamy whipped cream, then a thicker concoction, and finally, after about 15 minutes of constant shaking, the liquids and solids will separate. Once separated, pour off the buttermilk and rinse the solids under cool water until the water runs clear. And then you're free to add salt, herbs, garlic, or whatever else you wish. And now the picture is complete. Bread and butter, together at last. Now for some food for thought. Picture this. It's 3 a.m. The streets are quiet. All is calm, serene. The world around us, apart from a select few night owls, is fast asleep. But right at this very hour, thousands of bakers are already hard at work, prepping all their batches for the following day. Mixing, kneading, flouring, shaping, sculpting, creating. Imagine the dedication that takes to do it all before sunrise. Many of these bakers go home once all the shelves are stocked. They won't see whose hands their creations will end up in, but they're rewarded with an even greater satisfaction than thanks, or recognition, or even the weekly paycheck. The satisfaction of having created and brought joy to someone with something they've produced with their own two hands. I think we can all take something from that, can't we? Let's all be bakers. Let's be craftsmen. Let's be artists and artisans. But above all, let's be humble. And with that, that's it for today's episode of On the Table. I hope this episode has filled you with some sustenance and inspired you to stir up something new. Thank you for joining me. And remember, at my table, you're always welcome.